Before you skip this video, pause for just a moment, because what you are about to hear is not another emotional trick, not a disappearance strategy, and not a guide on how to make someone suffer for leaving you. Stoic Path does not teach revenge disguised as self-improvement. It teaches something quieter and far more transformative. Most people believe regret is created by absence, by silence, by distance. Stoic wisdom challenges this completely. Regret does not begin when you vanish. It begins when you stop organizing your inner world around someone who chose to leave. When people walk away, they often expect a familiar rhythm. They expect explanations, emotional availability, lingering attention, or quiet signals that they still matter. And when that rhythm ends not with anger, not with dramatic withdrawal, but with calm, something breaks. Not in them first, but in you. This video is not about proving your value. It is not about winning, chasing, or showing anyone what they lost. It is about restoring inner order after disruption. Because the moment you stop reacting, justifying, and waiting, something essential returns: clarity. Stay with Stoic Path. Don't skip this. The first way may feel uncomfortable because it removes a habit you have practiced unconsciously. But it is also where dignity begins to re-establish itself. If this path resonates, if you are choosing self-command over emotional noise, take a moment now. Like this video so it reaches those who need calm more than validation. Share it with someone learning to walk away without resentment. And subscribe to Stoic Path if you are committed to quiet strength, not loud reaction. Now, let us begin with the first way. Way number 1. Withdraw access without drama. The most common misunderstanding about silence is this: that you go quiet so they will notice, so they will miss you, so they will feel the absence and regret the decision they made. Stoic philosophy corrects this immediately. Silence is not absence. Silence is boundary. When you withdraw access, you are not trying to disappear from someone else's mind. You are removing their unexamined access to yours. The Stoics were clear about this distinction. What disturbs us is not events themselves, but the way impressions are allowed to enter and remain. When access remains open through checking, watching, waiting, you are still granting permission for those impressions to rule your inner state. This is why access is not the same as presence. You can be physically absent and still emotionally available. You can be silent and still mentally entangled. Stoic correction begins with control. As explained in Enchiridion Section 1, some things are within our power and others are not. You cannot control whether someone misses you, regrets you, or reconsiders their choice. But you can control what impressions you allow to pass through your attention. Withdrawal of access is the decision to stop feeding impressions that no longer serve inner order. In modern life, this looks unglamorous and very specific. It means no checking their social media, no just curious glances disguised as closure, no staying on the edge of their life through mutual updates or indirect signals. Not because these actions are dramatic, but because they quietly keep the door open. Marcus Aurelius reminds us in Meditations Book 4 that attention is one of the few true forms of power we possess. Where attention goes, the mind follows. And where the mind follows, emotional disturbance soon arrives. When you reclaim attention, you begin reclaiming sovereignty. The inner shift is subtle at first. You feel space where vigilance once lived. Your nervous system stops scanning for meaning in silence. Thoughts slow down, not because answers arrive, but because the questions stop demanding immediate response. This is the moment most people mistake as weakness. In truth, it is structure returning. Only after inner order stabilizes does the external world sometimes respond. People may notice the absence. They may wonder why access ended so cleanly. But Stoic Path does not wait for this. The quiet consequence that matters happens earlier. You stop rehearsing loss. You stop orbiting a decision that was never yours to control. And silence becomes what it was always meant to be, not a signal, but a boundary that protects peace. Way number 2, end the story before it ends you. The longest captivity after a separation is not emotional attachment, it is the story you keep telling yourself. Long after the event has passed, the narrative continues to replay what they meant, what went wrong, what you should have said, what it all means about you. This internal dialogue feels like processing, but in reality, it is rehearsal. And whatever you rehearse, you reinforce. Stoic philosophy warns that suffering often persists not because of what happened, but because the mind keeps returning to it, polishing the same impressions until they feel permanent. This internal loop rarely stays private. It leaks. You tell friends just to vent. You post something vague but pointed. You revisit the story with different audiences, hoping that each retelling will finally bring relief. This is what can be called social leakage, when your inner disturbance spills outward, multiplying itself through attention and reaction. The more the story circulates, the more real and immovable it becomes. Worse, it keeps the other person psychologically present. Even in their absence, they occupy space in your conversations, your explanations, your identity. The Stoics understood that noise, especially self-generated noise, is one of the fastest ways to lose tranquility. Here, Stoic discipline offers a clear correction: restraint of speech. In Meditations Book 8, Marcus Aurelius reminds himself not to waste words on matters that do not improve character or restore order. Speech, for a Stoic, is not a release valve for emotion. It is a tool that must serve clarity. Seneca develops this further in Letters from a Stoic Letter 56, where he contrasts inner tranquility with the constant noise that agitates the mind. Silence, he argues, is not deprivation, but protection. In practice, this discipline looks almost disappointingly simple. When asked about what happened, you answer briefly, "I'm focused on other things now." No timeline, no moral verdict, no dramatic summary. When the conversation circles back, you redirect it. Not defensively, not coldly, but decisively. You do not owe anyone the full archive of your emotional history. Each refusal to elaborate is not avoidance, it is containment. As the story stops circulating, something unexpected occurs. The emotional charge begins to cool. Without repetition, the narrative loses momentum. The mind, deprived of its usual script, settles. This is liberation, not through confrontation, but through quiet closure. The story ends not because it was resolved, but because it was no longer fed. And when the story ends, the hold it had on you dissolves with it. Way number 3, revealed. Quietly, not visibly. After separation, a seductive idea often appears. Become better so they can see it. Improve visibly. Change loudly. Let progress serve as evidence. Stoic philosophy dismantles this impulse at the root. Improvement that depends on being witnessed is still governed by external judgment, and anything governed by externals cannot stabilize inner order. When growth becomes performance, the mind remains oriented outward, measuring itself against imagined reactions rather than internal standards. The Stoic purpose is different. To live in accordance with nature is not to display excellence, but to fulfill one's role with consistency and restraint. In Discourses Book I, Epictetus repeatedly returns to this idea. The task of a human being is not to impress, but to act rightly within the role life has assigned. When your efforts are shaped by who is watching, you have already abandoned the role. When they are shaped by what is fitting, clarity returns. Rebuilding quietly begins with daily alignment rather than dramatic change. It is not the grand gesture, the public reinvention, or the sudden declaration of a new identity. It is the ordinary discipline of choosing habits that reinforce steadiness. You wake at a consistent time. You move your body because it restores order, not because it advertises recovery. You learn, read, and work without narrating the process. You adjust your environment, who you spend time with, what you consume, where you place your attention, so that calm is easier to maintain than chaos. None of this is impressive. That is precisely why it works. Marcus Aurelius speaks to this discipline directly in Meditation's book Phi, where he reminds himself that self-control is not proven by bursts of effort, but by sustained moderation. The Stoic does not wait to feel motivated. He acts according to principle. Over time, repeated alignment creates a quiet momentum that does not need validation to continue. The crucial shift here is not behavioral, but structural. You are no longer trying to change outcomes. You are changing standards. Instead of asking, "How do I look now?" the question becomes, "Does this action preserve inner order?" Instead of measuring progress by external reaction, you measure it by stability. Fewer emotional spikes, less rumination, a stronger sense of sufficiency. This is identity reform, not image repair. At this point, something subtle happens. You stop thinking in terms of recovery and begin thinking in terms of responsibility to your time, your character, your direction. The past no longer defines the pace of your improvement. And if someone eventually notices the change, it arrives as a side effect, not a goal. Stoic rebuilding reaches its peak not when others are convinced, but when you no longer need to be seen to remain steady. Way number 4, respond only to reality, not probes. At some point, after distance has been established, a small signal often appears, a brief message without substance, a delayed reaction to something old, a neutral question that carries no context and no responsibility. It is not a return, not an apology, not an effort, just a reach. This moment is less about the other person and more about you, because it presents a quiet test of character. Stoic philosophy treats moments like this as examinations of impressions. In Discourses Book 2, Epictetus explains that what disturbs us is not the external prompt, but our judgment of it. The signal itself is neutral. The disturbance arises when the mind assigns meaning too quickly, hope, validation, or the promise of repair. This is where the Stoic filter must be applied. Is this reality, or merely an impression asking for access? Reality carries weight. It shows intention through effort, clarity through action, and accountability through consistency. An impression, by contrast, is light. It tests without committing. It invites reaction without offering structure. Responding to impressions reopens loops that were intentionally closed. The Stoic response, therefore, is not hostility or coldness, but selectivity. You respond only to what is real. In practice, this means you do not rush to answer signals that demand emotional availability without offering substance. You do not fill silence with interpretation. If you respond at all, the response is measured and finite, leaving no opening for a renewed cycle. Often, the most disciplined response is no response, not as a tactic, but as an alignment with reality. Silence here is not a message. It is a refusal to engage with what lacks form. Seneca addresses this dignity of restraint in Letters from a Stoic Letter 85, where he argues that self-respect is maintained not by asserting power, but by refusing to cheapen oneself through unnecessary engagement. To answer every call is to surrender autonomy. To choose when to engage is to preserve it. Dignity, in Stoic terms, is inseparable from discretion. This is the hinge between clarity and rebirth. Up to this point, you have restored order, ended the narrative, and rebuilt alignment. Here, you protect it. By responding only to reality, you signal first to yourself that your standards are no longer negotiable. You are not withholding out of pride, nor testing the other person in return. You are simply declining to reopen a chapter that reality has not meaningfully rewritten. Non-reaction, when grounded in principle, is not avoidance. It is coherence. And coherence is what allows a life, once disrupted, to move forward without dragging unfinished impressions behind it. Way number 5. Live without waiting for a verdict. The final trap is the quietest one. Waiting for them to realize. Waiting for regret to arrive, like a verdict that confirms your worth. This expectation feels reasonable, even dignified. But Stoic philosophy treats it as a subtle form of dependence. As long as your peace is suspended on someone else's realization, your inner life remains unfinished. You are no longer reacting, but you are still postponing yourself. Stoicism dismantles this trap through indifference to externals. In Enchiridion section 33, Epictetus urges the practitioner to treat praise and blame, gain and loss, presence and absence with the same composure, not because these things are meaningless, but because they are not yours to command. Regret belongs to another mind. Waiting for it is a quiet way of giving that mind authority over your equilibrium. Indifference here does not mean coldness. It means clarity about jurisdiction. You attend to what is within your power, judgment, intention, action, and release what is not. When you stop scanning the horizon for a response, life stops feeling provisional. Decisions no longer require imagined approval. Days are lived for their own coherence, not as a prelude to a reaction that may never come. This is where freedom emerges, not the dramatic kind that announces itself, but the practical freedom of not needing an outcome to proceed. You choose your work, your relationships, your pace without asking whether they will be witnessed. The mind becomes less argumentative, less vigilant. You are no longer rehearsing what it would mean if they felt something. You are occupied with what it means that you do. Marcus Aurelius describes this interior independence as an inner citadel in Meditation's book, Ec 12, a place within that cannot be breached by opinion or neglect. When you live from this citadel, you are not protected by distance, but by orientation. Your center does not shift with external weather. This is the final movement from clarity into rebirth, a life that proceeds without awaiting judgment. And here the paradox appears. When you stop waiting for regret, you remove the last tether. You are no longer acting to produce a reaction or to avoid one. If regret appears on the outside, it does so late after your life has already reorganized itself without reference to it. By then, it carries no authority. It is simply another external event, noticed and released. This is why Stoic Path insists that regret must never be the goal. Goals that depend on others keep the self unfinished. Liberation arrives when you live as though no verdict is coming because none is required. In that freedom, the past loses leverage, the future loses its threat, and the present becomes sufficient. You do not win because someone else realizes something. You are free because you stopped waiting for them to. Across these 5 ways, a single Stoic principle emerges with clarity. Regret is never something you create. It is something that sometimes appears when access is removed and inner order is restored. The difference matters. When regret becomes the aim, your life quietly reorients around another person again. You may stop chasing them, but you continue to measure yourself by their eventual realization. That is not freedom. It is a delayed form of dependence. Stoic philosophy consistently warns against this mistake. In Discourses Book 3, Epictetus explains that progress collapses the moment we seek outcomes that lie outside our authority. To act well while waiting for a response is still to act conditionally. Virtue, he insists, must stand on its own, complete in the moment it is exercised, not validated by what follows. Seen together, the 5 ways form a coherent movement. You withdraw access, end the narrative, rebuild alignment, respond only to reality, and finally live without awaiting a verdict. None of these steps are designed to provoke emotion in another person. They are designed to remove disorder in yourself. When that disorder is gone, attention returns to its proper place. Speech becomes measured, effort becomes quiet, and boundaries hold without force. This is regained inner order. Regret, if it appears, is a byproduct of that order, not its proof. It arises because access was once assumed and is no longer available, because your reactions stopped reinforcing an old pattern. But the Stoic does not pause to examine it. To do so would be to reopen the very loop that was closed. As Marcus Aurelius reminds himself in Meditations Book 2, the task is always the same: to meet the present with integrity and let externals pass without attachment. The warning, then, is simple and exact. Pursuing regret places your peace back in someone else's hands. It invites comparison, waiting, and quiet bargaining with the past. Stoic Path rejects this entirely. The work is finished when inner order returns. Anything that follows is incidental. You do not move forward so that someone else feels something. You move forward because coherence has been restored. And when coherence is intact, no external verdict is required. There is a quiet pattern that runs through everything you've just heard. You did not learn how to disappear to be missed. You did not learn how to improve to be admired. You learned how to return to yourself without noise. Each way was not about controlling outcomes, but about restoring order, ending access, ending the story, rebuilding without performance, responding only to what is real, and finally, living without waiting for a verdict. This is the Stoic path through loss. Not hardening, not chasing, not proving, just recentering. When inner order collapses, the mind looks outward for resolution. It waits for apologies, realizations, or regret to make sense of the disruption. Stoicism teaches the opposite movement. Peace does not arrive when others understand what they lost. It arrives when you stop organizing your life around what was taken. By withdrawing access, disciplining speech, aligning daily action, and protecting boundaries, you reclaim authority over your inner world. And once that authority returns, nothing external is required to complete you. Self-respect begins the moment you stop waiting for permission to move on. Now take a moment and reflect honestly. Which way brought you back to yourself? Not which one felt strongest, but which one restored calm where tension used to live. If this journey resonated, leave a comment below. My inner order comes first. Not as a declaration to anyone else, but as a reminder to yourself. And if you choose calm over reaction, clarity over drama, and dignity over explanation, support this path. Like this video so it reaches those who need steadiness more than stimulation. Subscribe to Stoic Path if you are committed to quiet strength and lasting inner order. We walk this path without noise,